Hey, team, welcome back to another episode of the Intentional Agribusiness Leader podcast. This is your host, Mark Jewell, and today I'm on with the CEO of Sorghum United, Mr. Nate Blum. Nate, welcome to the show, man.
Mark, great to have you. Thanks again. And I love what you're doing there. Glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, excited to jump in and learn from you and learn. Maybe we'll learn a little bit about sorghum today too. That's
Oh,
something
man, if I'm doing my job, you will. Absolutely.
we're learning a thing or two about this. We'll dive into that a little bit more in a bit. But to get us kicked off, what does it mean for you, Nate, to be intentional?
This is actually something that I've been challenging myself with for the last several years. Um, because what I find is it's very easy to be pulled in 100 different directions if we don't have the path in front of us already chosen. And this means that there are some things that we can't do, and there are other things that we need to do that we don't necessarily want to do, but
Yeah.
they need to be done. So to be intentional, and being intentional as a leader means really developing that vision and following it, and not letting people distract you and pull you away from that vision.
Mhm.
Even maybe if they don't understand the fullness of the vision. It's like I always tell my kids, nothing's going to be as important to someone else as it is to you. But this is also true with vision, right? Even some of the people that we work with, they understand they're part of the fullness of the vision. But what we're doing is very large, very complex, and it's global. And it's unique for someone to see the full 30,000 foot view when most people live at the 10,000 foot view. And so, as a CEO, I need to be very intentional because I do know how these things all play together and how they work together. Um, so, yeah, that's what it means for me to be intentional.
Very cool. I want to go back to the part about vision. Yeah, I think this is something that a lot of people really struggle with. I even catch myself here. We're at the end of Q1 2024 as we record this. I know very clearly everything that was in the vision for 2024 and beyond, but 2024 has got to play its part for the broader vision to come into purview, right? Yeah, and you get into the quarter, man, and it's like you're at the end of the third round of a 12 round fight, you know, and it's really easy, isn't it, to get to kind of lose sight of that which you were aiming to create. Fair?
Yeah,
Like,
you're absolutely right. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
yeah, no. So what's your take? How do you stay focused, and how do you keep your eye on the prize, on the vision, even though you're in the midst of the battle day to day?
Well, I think first of all, we have to recognize that just because we have a vision doesn't mean that that vision is always set in stone. We can't be so inflexible as to not be able to adjust and adapt as things happen and things change. And in fact, if you would have asked me my vision for our organization, Sorghum United, a year ago, I would have given you a vastly different answer than what we have now. And the reason that's changed is because, as we always should be doing, I've learned and grown quite a bit in the last year, and I've understood where better our organization can fit. So I think the important thing to remember with vision is that it has to be flexible. You can't learn things and then still do things the same way, right? It just doesn't work that way. As
Yeah.
far as staying on task, I was just speaking to a group of high school students yesterday, and the question actually was, how do I stay motivated, essentially, right?
Hmm.
And I always use I use this analogy with them, and I'll use it with you as well. Um, if your listeners are familiar with their Greek mythology, then they'll know the story of Sisyphus. Sisyphus, for those who aren't familiar, essentially the short version, Cliff's Notes, he made the gods angry, and they sent him to Hades, and he was tasked, or rather cursed, I should say, with rolling a boulder uphill for all of eternity. Okay. Now, if you put yourself in Sisyphus's unfortunate shoes, there's one thing that he can't know and one thing that he does know. The thing he can't know is how close he is to a bit of a reprieve. Maybe there's a flat spot on the hill. Maybe there's a terrace or a cliff or something that he can rest for a minute. But he can't know that. He does have no idea how far he is from the top of the hill, right? Because he can't see past the boulder he's pushing. But the one thing that he does know is that the minute he lets go is the minute he'll have to start all over. That boulder will roll all the way down the hill and he'll have to start over. Now, the reason
Right.
I tell you this in the context of vision is because it's the same. It's the same. While that vision might change, that boulder might change. We have to know that if we don't stick with our vision, stay focused on our vision, despite the day-to-day battles, that we're going to have to start over. You just have to keep pushing. Fortunately at Sorghum United, as we've grown, I'm no longer pushing that boulder by myself, which is fantastic. And that's great when it happens. But when you're just
Yeah.
starting out, and when you're waking up every morning and you're questioning your vision and you're saying, what am I doing? Have I lost my mind? Holy cow, why are we doing this? You just have to be really strong in your convictions. And you have to understand that the second that you stop is when you're just going to have to start all over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the great analogy. Great analogy. Great way to tee that up, man. Well, okay, so talk to us a little bit about Sorghum United. Who are you? What do you guys do?
Yeah,
Why is
so we're
yeah.
yeah, so let's talk about the why we do what we do, and then I'll talk about who we are. So we're really concerned about issues around food security, regional food systems, hunger and malnutrition,
Mhm.
as well as economic and environmental sustainability. Now, we do this within the context of sorghum and millets, not because we like those grains any more than other grains. We love corn, we love wheat, we love rice, all these other grains.
Mhm.
But sorghum and millets in particular don't have the leadership, advocacy, or general consumer awareness. And so
Right.
that's the context in which we push. So who we actually are we're a global nonprofit. And we now have, I want to say we've got about 3,000 stakeholders now in all points of the value chain for sorghum and millets. So it's not just farmers. In fact, we would love to have more farmers, actually.
Mhm.
Most of the folks that we have are either in research, they're seed dealers, we do have several farmers, of course, but we could always use more. They're processors, they're input providers, whether that's your chemical inputs or your mechanical inputs, investment bankers, traders, et cetera, all the way down the line to consumers. And what unites them isn't, again, really the sorghum and the millets piece, but it's those things we talked about around sustainability and hunger and really trying to solve some of the biggest problems in the world. So how we do what we do, you can think of it in two different ways. One thing we do, and probably the most pertinent, I think, for industry support, is that through technology, through things like WhatsApp and our website, and of course, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all the different social platforms, we're able to connect our stakeholders around the world, right? And as a non-governmental organization, what that means is that we're somewhat immune to geopolitical realities. And with the digital age and digital technology that we have, we can also erase geographic boundaries as well. So this means that we have these online platforms that provide for conversations around, say, research, for example. One example I like to give, we had a seed dealer in Mali in West Africa, and
Mhm.
he was curious about what the research showed for the optimal row spacing for sorghum. Uh, Most of your listeners here in North America, by the way, might know sorghum as Milo, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit too. But anyway, so he asked the question, and on our group, and we had a researcher within minutes on the other side of the planet answering his question, and not only that, but then going further in depth into the agronomy that his farmers would need to be successful. So
Wow.
it's that kind of thing. It's really neat to see when that happens. And the group is growing. So people can join that. Anyone can join it. It's the best way to find us is at sorghumunited.com. At the very top of the page, there's a button that says Global Forums. And if you click that, it'll take you to our global WhatsApp group. And then within WhatsApp, there are subgroups. So if you're interested in, say, processing, there's a group for that. If you're interested in research, there's a group for that, or policy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
So that's one arm of what we do. Now, the other arm of what we do is really around markets development. The reality is, as much as we would love farmers to include sorghum and millets in their cropping systems, within their rotations, we can't ask them. And as a farm kid, I'll tell you, I grew up on a farm. I would never ask a farmer to grow something that they can't sell and they can't make a profit doing.
Right.
All right. We love environmental sustainability, and I know we could talk about that all day long.
Mhm.
But it's got to be economic stability, sorry, for the farmer as well. So what we do is we actually publish a series of children's books. They're called the Sorgo Squad. You can find those at sorghosquad.com. That's SORGHO squad.com. And they're kind of comic book style graphic novels. I describe them as Indiana Jones meets Captain Planet. They're really fun, but they're also educational. We've actually gotten a pretty good foothold, and it's growing in the educational space because it's teaching young people about not only these grains, but the nutrition, the environmental benefits, the biodiversity. And then they take place all over the world, actually. So it's maybe not an intentional thing that we did when we wrote those, but a great way to introduce young people to other cultures as well.
Sure.
And frankly, they're a lot of fun. So that's actually our primary funding source, but then it also serves as our markets development arm to get consumers excited about products using these grains.
Wow, very cool, man. There's a lot going on there. What are you seeing in way of demand for sorghum? What are some of the main food type products that maybe we're running into it? Maybe it's in our food and we just don't know it. We a lot of things are obviously. So yeah,
Yeah.
what are the main markets?
Well, in North America, the largest market for sorghum is actually pet food. So those people that are paying for a premium, cat and dog food, probably has some sorghum in it. Maybe not millets. We really only grow, we grow all sorts of millets in the U.S., but not in large quantities.
Okay.
The most common here would be proso millet, but there are dozens of different millet varieties. But at any rate, another thing people would commonly find sorghum and other millets like proso in would be their bags of birdseed, right? So when if you have bird feeder in your backyard, you buy a bag of birdseed, look at the ingredients. Birds absolutely love it. Oh, and the lights just went out. I guess I wasn't moving enough.
Okay, well,
Wow.
you're fine. Still look good still look good on this way, and sound good on audio. If we're listening to the podcast, it is what it is.
Well, I tell you what, I am told I look better in the dark, so maybe that's okay.
There
Here, I'll just turn
you go.
slightly.
You get a little light coming
There we go. There.
there. There you go. Nice,
So,
nice picture of
you know
someone
what? You roll,
on that.
you talk about intentional leadership. Sometimes you got to just roll with the punches, brother. That's leadership.
Honestly, that's part of that. It's a big part of it. That's most of it. Like,
So anyway, you were asking about products. Okay, so food products, things that you may be eating already that have sorghum in it. There are some of those things on the shelf. For example, the Cheerios that my wife eats has some sorghum in it.
okay.
Um, Kind Bars have a line that uses sorghum. Gerber has a baby food line that includes sorghum. And a lot of your gluten-free flours are starting to use more sorghum in their formulations. Now they're still using things like rice flour, which is okay. But when you look at the nutritional profile, I will tell you sorghum and millets are a much better nutritive option, I should say,
Well,
uh, compared to other gluten-free flour options.
that was going to be one of my questions because I'm a big, I turned 40 and finally discovered that my guts don't work like I thought they did at one point. And the reality is they probably weren't working as well as they could have been for a long time due to, certain things. And I just went on, I did the 75 hard program, which over the course of 75 hard, you have to do a certain number of things for 75 days in a row, and you can't miss any one of those things during that 75 days, or you have to start over from the beginning. And so you have to do 2 workouts a day. One of those workouts has to be outside. You got to read 10 pages of a book. You have to drink a gallon of water. You cannot drink alcohol during this time frame. And and then the kicker is you got to follow some sort of a diet during this program. And so I just decided,
Mhm.
I'm just going to test. Like, I know, I generally speaking, I feel better when I eat fewer carbs. Generally speaking, like this is true for most people. I feel better when I don't have as much alcohol, things like this, right? And so I eliminated, obviously you're eliminating alcohol with the program, but you're also eliminating, with the diet that I chose was just to do full gluten free. So no pasta, no wheat, no whiskey, nothing, in this, in that vein. And man, after probably 60 days into it, I felt like my body was singing. It was so like I just felt so much more energy and so forth. And so this sort of my self-diagnosis, to say, okay, who knows what, I'm not going to get into any, particular label. I just decided to go gluten free. Okay. And to just stick
Mhm.
to that diet. So when I go to the restaurant, I say, hey, just nothing about, what that fits this profile. And so I've been searching out other things because just because I'm not eating wheat-based products, I still like beer.
Mhm.
There's still other things that I do.
Well, and it's
So,
funny that it's interesting that you mentioned the gut part of it, because the reason I say this is because right here in Nebraska where I live, which normally we do keep the lights on. I promise. I'm at the University of Nebraska right now, but I'm in a room where the lights just went off.
yeah.
But at Innovation Campus here in Lincoln, there's an organization called the Food for Health Center. And
Hmm.
the Food for Health Center is one of, I believe, 6 organizations in the entire world that exclusively studies the human gut microbiome.
Hmm.
They published after 6 years of research last year. They published not one but two different studies in the journal Nature, which is a very exclusive and well-respected publication.
Yeah.
But they published two different articles detailing their findings around how sorghum in particular can help to rebalance the human gut microbiome.
Hmm.
The reality is these grains are among the first that mankind cultivated. They came out of places like Africa, Mesopotamia, Asia, India, those areas.
Hmm.
And as such, our human gut, our microbiology within our gut, I should say, evolved alongside these grains.
Yeah.
So it only makes sense that we feel better when we eat them and we include them. The problem is that over the course of the last, 150 to 100 years, they've been largely forgotten.
Hmm.
And our food systems are, as much as we love, like I said, corn, wheat, rice, etc. Um, our food systems have become predominated by only a handful of grains, and we're not utilizing the full grain basket, so to speak.
Sure.
So this is something that we try to advocate for. It's really important to remember, and I'm always careful to say this. We have such an adversarial system in the U.S.
Hmm.
So people always think, well, if you're for this, you're against that. We're not talking about replacing other grains. We're talking about supplementing human diets and cropping systems with these other grains, because we don't want to replace one monoculture system for another. So how do we include these? So maybe you're not getting your Cheerios that are made with 100% sorghum, but they're in that formulation for those Cheerios, for example.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating stuff. So, from a nutritional standpoint, this is my context before was really for this question. So, what do you think the nutritional value of sorghum? How would that compare?
Oh,
To
I keep a chart actually on my phone. I've got a table that was published by one of the universities in India, but I know the United Sorghum Checkoff program in the US has this data as well. But it's easy to find.
Mhm.
But there are a couple of tables that show the nutritional comparison between various millets, sorghum, and then corn, wheat, rice, etc.
Yeah.
And it's not even fair. I mean, if you do want to be competitive, if you're a competitive spirit, it's not even fair. I mean, sorghum and millets are very high in protein. They're very high in fiber. They're high in your macronutrients, a lot of your micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there have been, in addition to the research that's been done at the Food for Health Center, there are now, I want to say, well over 200 different independently researched and published articles from academia around the world, and they all verify the same things around benefits for anti-inflammatory benefits, in particular inflammatory bowel management, anti-carcinogenic benefits, heart health benefits, anti-diabetic benefits, and more.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense from a human health standpoint that we should be eating these grains more. And then when we talk about growing these grains, including them in our cropping systems, there are a ton of environmental benefits as well, right? So from a soil health perspective, let's start there. Sorghum in particular, sorghum and millets, they have a larger biomass. Now, what that means is a couple of things. One, it leaves more biology in the soil so that the microbiology, just like in our gut, there's microbiology in our soil also, right? And so they love to have organic material to eat, right? Of course, like anything else. So the more organic material you're leaving
Mm.
in the soil, the more food for the microbiology. Now, also because it's a large biomass that goes down about 6 feet, it can break up, excuse me, it breaks up the compaction layer within the soil. The compaction layer is the biggest, most common, I should say, problem with agriculture all around the world. It's this layer of soil that is, as you would guess, compact. And plants that have weaker root systems can't penetrate it. And what that means is that because they can't penetrate it, they can't access water and other things that they need
Sure.
from deep down. So when you plant sorghum in rotation, it breaks that compaction layer up and then allows your crops in rotation that follow to be more drought tolerant themselves because they have more access to water and things.
Mm.
Because that large biomass also, Texas A&M University put out a study, I think about a year and a half ago now, that shows that sorghum is an ideal crop for carbon sequestration. So for those that are interested in climate change, how do we pull more of that carbon out of the air? And so now we're looking at other in parts of the world how sorghum can not only be grown for human consumption, but how can we also create carbon sinks using sorghum? We can sequester that carbon deeper and for longer in the soil with these crops. From a water standpoint, sorghum itself uses about a third of the water of corn or maize. Other millets use as much of a tenth as a tenth of the water, excuse me, of some of these other comparable grains. And then from a biodiversity standpoint, pollinators love sorghum and millets. So I mean, even if you just want more bees in your backyard, take that bird seed and just kind of sow it around, and it'll grow pretty easily. And you'll have more materials for your pollinators, but also birds absolutely love it. So there's a lot of benefits, not only in human health, but also the environmental health. And why that's important, again, is we want farmers to grow these grains for those benefits, those environmental benefits, but they can't grow them if they don't have somewhere to sell them. So at the same time, we have to also work on that markets development and do interviews like this and just share with people what these grains are.
Yeah. Where are we in the, I mean, what is the upside potential for sorghum? Is it just an awareness issue? The emphasis has not been placed on this. There would be more demand if this had been marketed like other checkoff oriented grains in the past, that kind of thing. I mean, is there a significant upside in the market? Is that what you guys are seeing? Or, I mean,
There's
lay
absolutely,
that
and
out.
then, now this is a couple of years old now, but I wanted to ask that same question a few years ago. I used to be the director of the Nebraska Grain Sorghum Board prior to this role, and I wanted to try to quantify what the value for some of these benefits that sorghum has, or I should say attributes that sorghum has. So
Mhm.
things like gluten-free, non-GMO, clean labeling, nutraceuticals. And so what I was able to do was just through some online searching and some studying of some research papers at that time using 2019 data, um, each of those markets globally were valued within the billions of dollars. So what I didn't do was study specifically sorghum and millets. Instead, I studied the attributes that consumers are willing to pay for, and those were the four.
Mm.
And we know that that's only grown since then. The compound annual growth rate for each of those, well, I think all but one of them was in the double digits.
Hmm.
And I've got that data. I don't know if it's on our website or not, but I can certainly share it with your viewers, and we'll actually probably put it on our website here if I don't have it up there already,
Yeah.
along with that nutritional chart that I mentioned earlier. So there's a huge potential. Now, the problem within the industry is that we've really been focused. You mentioned the checkoffs, and I think we're a different animal than the checkoffs, so I don't feel like we're in competition with them. I think what they do really well.
Yeah.
But the focus really within the industry, not just in sorghum, but also with the other grains in the US, is less on value addition and more on commodity trading. Okay. And that's important. We need the commodity markets. China buys 93% of the US sorghum. We need more commodity markets rather than just China.
Mhm.
Globally, China buys 80%, by the way.
Wow.
And so where we really play, the space that we play in really is around regional food systems rather than the large commodity trading. Because I don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? We're just trying to put new tread on wheels we've already got.
Yeah.
So in the U.S., we look at places like Nebraska because we're geographically central,
Mm.
and these grains are grown here, right? So we try to attract processors to develop their own facilities, their own processing facilities in places that are proximate to their production of grains. Like I said, in Nebraska, we grow sorghum and proso millet. So it makes a lot of sense instead of shipping it out raw to actually finish it or semi-finish it here and then
Mhm.
ship it to the rest of the continent. But this is also true in places that are geographically central in Africa, West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, as well as in India, other parts of Asia. We're trying to bring more value to farmers. And by the way, when we do that, the farmers, at least in their rotation, they can mitigate their commodity marketing risk by doing direct contracting with at least one part of their cropping system. And then at the same time, because we're then bringing businesses to these areas, which are often rural, it's an
Yeah.
opportunity for job creation and economic prosperity for the community as well. So we think it's a win-win for everybody. Places in Africa, for example, I was just in Kenya a few weeks ago, and I visited West Pokot and Iraq, which are both very rural agricultural areas. And
Mhm.
these are places where they can grow these grains, and they're actually going back to these grains because their maize crops have failed. But there are also areas that are dependent upon food aid from USAID. And so it's really a question of, how do we help them to be able to feed themselves because they have the arable land and they've got grains now that we know that will grow in these arid conditions. So how do we help them not only grow their own food, but process their own food as well?
Mhm.
Because I mean, basic economic prosperity begins with full bellies, right? Full bellies and shelter.
Yeah.
So the only way to really lift these communities up intentionally is starting by helping them fill their own bellies rather than being dependent on us to fill their bellies.
Right, because I mean, the more dependent you become on, say, USAID to provide that, I mean, you're also at incredible risk,
Right.
uh, for because then when the geopolitical winds blow differently, all of a sudden you may not have that support any longer, and you're always dependent on someone else. So there's a couple of fascinating things I just want to dive into here if we can.
Yeah, sorry, that was a long-winded answer to I think what would have been a short question.
Yeah, well, but there's a lot of really good stuff in there. So, guys, go back and re-listen to that if this is interesting to you. It is interesting to me, so I'm going to dive a little bit deeper with Nate on this. Okay, first question is pertaining to the processing, and the second one is kind of coming back to the growing side of it. So, processing. What does that process? I mean, look like currently? If you have a farmer in Nebraska who's growing sorghum, where can they take it? What is that processing? What when you say processing more locally, what would that look like?
Right. So I'm actually really excited to mention this. We've been working with a couple near the Beatrice area. Actually, they live in Kansas City, but their farm ground is near the Beatrice area, which is about a half an hour south of Lincoln, where I live. And they have been working on getting a milling operation to do sorghum flour. They've worked with the university here to get their formulation correct. This will be, and I should say, they are planning on having a building up as early as July of this year. So we're really excited about that. This will be the first time in something like 30 years that we've had any milling for sorghum in Nebraska. This is a big problem in the United States. I mean, we want to develop value-added markets, but there are very few players in the U.S. that are working in this space.
Mhm.
So attracting, sometimes we have to look at bringing businesses in that want to access the U.S. market from outside of the U.S. Because we just don't have these food technologists and people working here. So the question of how you mill it, I guess, is kind of what you were asking.
Yeah.
Most commonly it's being ground into flour. And because it's gluten free, like when I bake at home with it, I'm using an all purpose blend. So it's got xanthan gum as a binder since there's no gluten, and then maybe a little bit of potato starch. And then I use it just like I would wheat flour. I mean, the same
Sure.
recipes and everything.
Yeah.
But we also use it as a whole grain too. So there are other, I know a couple of farmers here that are just kind of cleaning it and maybe dehulling it and
Mhm.
selling it that way. And when it's used that way, we use it just like we would rice at home. The cook time's different, but we use it just in the same way we do rice. So
Hmm.
that's the primary processing we have. Other states outside of Nebraska, they include sorghum in their ethanol formulations. In Nebraska, we don't because well, we have a lot of corn. That's why we haven't
Right.
needed. But places like Kansas, where they don't have a lot of water, they grow. Actually, Kansas grows the most sorghum in the U.S. They do use it in their ethanol formulation, and we know that it produces just a slight decrease in volume in ethanol than corn. The difference is you don't get as much of the oil byproduct, so that's also something that can be kind of a detraction for some of these ethanol processors. And then fiber as well, right? So if you're looking at the sorghum stock, that can be used to make temporary building materials. It can be used to make bioplastics. There's a company actually here in Lincoln that's making carbon fiber, a renewable carbon fiber with grain sorghum, which is
Hmm.
crazy. And then most of your listeners, if they've heard of sorghum or Milo in the US, particularly in the South,
Hmm.
they'll be very familiar with sorghum syrup.
Hmm.
So there really are there's a bunch of different varieties of sorghum and Milo, of course. But the most biggest difference, I should say, the biggest difference between the two most recognizable varieties. Okay, that's a really clumsy way to say it. But you've got grain sorghum, which is a shorter sorghum. It's got a big full grain head. Okay. And then
Hmm.
you have forage sorghum. Now, forage sorghum is really tall and it's got a little grain head. Okay. So that can actually be used just like you would sugar cane, and it gets pressed. So what you do is you harvest, you're actually not harvesting for the grain, you're harvesting for the stock, and then
Hmm.
it gets pressed and they extract the sugars from it. I understand that in some of the sugarcane growing areas, they actually do forage sorghum in rotation for that reason. But there's more there than just the sugars. There's the fibers and things like that too. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that really answers your
Well,
question.
it
But
does.
the short answer is there's a lot of room. If there are entrepreneurs listening that
Yeah.
are interested in making food products using these, I've got entrepreneurs around the world that are making everything from breads to cookies to pasta,
Hmm.
all sorts of things, ready to eat meals even, and snack foods using sorghum. So it's not like
I
they're
know, I mean,
reinventing
I
the
can
wheel.
speak
There's a
from,
tremendous opportunity in the U.S.
Nate, from my, just from my end, just my personal experience in going gluten free, not by choice, but I recognize like I'm going to live less years and I'm going to have less vitality if I didn't make that change in my diet. So this is not a trend thing for me. This is a lifestyle necessity, right, for quality of life. So I made that decision. So now, and by the way, I live with my Italian mother-in-law lives with us in our house, right? And my wife grew up in Italy, so there's a great desire for amazing pasta,
Mhm.
and think,
Our vice president is from Italy, from
okay,
Milan actually, and
yeah,
she makes gluten-free pasta using sorghum. She doesn't even use xanthan gum or anything. It's in how she processes the flour. She's able to retain it to get to stick and work.
yeah,
I've had her stuff. It cooks al dente every time. It's fantastic.
beautiful.
And in fact, I'm jumping on a plane for Rome here in just a couple of days. So
Fantastic. Well, we're going
yeah.
there this summer, so I look forward to taking some of this. But so my point is this, right? I'll go to say like a coffee shop, and I just want to, maybe it's a breakfast meeting, or I'm just running in with my kids, and just yesterday morning I was in there with my daughter, and I go to a Caribou Coffee, happen to have one here in North Carolina, and there are for breakfast 10, 12 different sandwich options on the normal menu.
Mhm.
the uh, the gluten free menu, I have the choice of this egg thing, which is good. I like eggs, right? It's a little egg. I don't know what they call it, but it's eggs. Okay, eggs with some bacon in it. Um, and then you have another sandwich option, which is just like artichoke and provolone cheese, no meat,
Mhm.
right? So it's as if the idea is like the gluten free people don't like meat or we're all vegans or but no, that's not the point. Right? The point is I'm trying to preserve my gut for longevity and vitality for the next 50 years of my life and make my gut healthy again. So I get frustrated, but where I see is like there's so much. I mean, for every one of me, right? There's 100,000 more, right? I mean, there's just so many other people that I know that are impacted by this. And the more that I focus on it, the more I meet other people that are going through this or they're experiencing gut issues or whatever. So I know that the upside potential for the market is here. It's just how do like you say, who are the entrepreneurs out there that can take advantage of that and are willing? I'm sitting here thinking like, I live in North Carolina, and there's got to be some people here who would want to grow this. Can we get a millet? What does it look like? How do can we get a mill put in place? Like, well, where would you put that? There's tons of grants for stuff like that available for
Mhm.
investments in North Carolina. I've been searching through the USDA website, right? I know that these things are available. Anyway, this is a really interesting conversation around intentional leadership, because to me, intentional leaders are people who are deliberate, and they're willing to take a distinct approach to the market. And so when part of that being deliberate is looking for things like this, and we're one of the big, the big things that are the big things in agriculture today may not necessarily be the big things 5 or 10 years from now. It may be something like this, right? Because we recognize, and this is something I believe passionately, as we do a piss poor job in this industry of feeding our people in a healthy way. I know this because we have a lot of people that go through our programs who are very unhealthy. And they discovered this as the result of going through our Thriving Leader program. So, I'm looking for ways like, man, what can we get behind? What can we support? That will, provide better just straight up better nutrition options than what we're currently getting at the grocery store today. So we don't have time to go too much deeper into that, but I want to cover just two more things. So one, you mentioned 93% of U.S. sorghum going to China, so we know that market is there. Is the majority, are they eating that, or are they making that into alcohol? Because if I remember right from our first conversation, right, they make a booze, they make an
Yeah,
alcohol, and that's like a traditional drink, and that's what they use most of this for. Is that accurate?
correctly. Yeah, correct. They make something called baijiu, which is kind of a whiskey
Mm-hmm.
made with sorghum, and it's really the cultural touchstone for China. Now, I've had some of it, and I hate to offend anybody who might be listening. It's really strong stuff. I describe the flavor as fire and regret all at the same time.
And regret. Okay.
But gluten free. And one quick point, since you mentioned gluten free in your comments just a second ago. So
Mhm.
I've got a friend here in Nebraska who's a brewer. He makes beer, and I've been
Mhm.
after him for years to make a gluten free sorghum beer. And
Mhm.
he's told me, well, the market for gluten free is just not that big, and I don't know that we want to make the investment. And so I've challenged him with this. I said, okay, fine, make a good beer that happens to be gluten free, right? So to your entrepreneurs who want to capture the gluten free market,
Mhm.
but you don't want to just cater to vegans and then people who have these special dietary lifestyles, whatever. Make something good that just happens to be gluten free.
Mhm.
I
And
mean,
I
it doesn't. You don't have to market it to the gluten free population. It just happens to be gluten free.
yeah, in all seriousness, there are a couple out there that I've now had that I like I enjoy. Like you, if you came over and we sat down, like, hey, would you like a beer? And I go grab it out of the fridge, and nobody would know, right?
Mhm.
Nobody, if we just poured a glass or had a keg of it or whatever, like nobody would know, the difference. But what you do notice is the next day you feel better. It
Mhm.
burns, and the body, right? It's not just the alcohol, it's the other effects of the stuff, that are mixing together in your gut, and how it affects your microbiome, and that affects your brain fog, level of brain fog. Brain fog on a gluten-free beer is actually lower than
Mhm.
everything else. Isn't it interesting? So
Yeah.
okay. So that was the piece on that. That's as much as I want to get into the alcohol side of it, but there is obviously a huge market there, because there's a lot of
There's.
people that are now gluten free that just struggle to find good options,
Mhm.
at a restaurant. Every restaurant I go to, I ask, what do you got for gluten free beers? And I do this on a mission now, very intentionally, because I know the more that those managers and those barbacks and everything everybody that's hearing, and
Mhm.
bartenders that are hearing this, like the more they hear it, the more they know there's demand. And the next time a distributor comes through and they have something, they're going to be more likely to put it on the tap or put it in their coolers. All right. From a production standpoint, what is the value per acre of sorghum versus, say, wheat or corn or something else that might grow on those same acres?
Right. So this is always a really interesting question. I'm not going to answer it quantitatively because it depends on what market you're going into, right?
Sure.
So
Mhm.
the thing I commonly get from farmers is, well, we don't want to grow sorghum because I can grow more bushels per acre of corn. And that's
Mhm.
absolutely true. You can, but your input prices are higher, right? Because the cost seed alone in Nebraska, on average, you can plant an acre of sorghum for about $15 US. That same acre you're going to plant into corn, you're looking at $250 to $300. Right there, you've got a huge value.
Right.
And then with your water usage, right, using a third of the water. So if you actually pencil it out, even though you're not getting maybe as much of a yield, and sometimes often sorghum actually, if you're just trading on the commodity market, does trade just under corn, usually 5 to 10 cents under corn. So you'd say, oh man, why would I
Mhm.
grow that? I'm not going to get the value there. But if you pencil it out, it actually works pretty well. If you're selling into a
Yeah.
specialty market, like I said, where we're trying to get, where we have processors proximate to the production of the grain, those processors are going to need very specific varieties, right? And that means that they're going to want to grown in certain conditions. And that
Mhm.
means that you can then intentionally talk about intentional agriculture. Our farmers can actually plant the grains, the varieties that their processors, their end users
Mhm.
specifically want. And because they're doing that, they can demand a higher price. So
Mhm.
there are different paradigms in which we can make these more valuable rather than just selling them in a commodity market, which we can't control.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Fascinating conversation. I really appreciate all this, even especially this last part here as well, guys. I mean, that's, those of you that are selling directly to farmers every day, or managing teams of people that are, that are going out there and having conversations with the customer. At some point, you have to start intentionally leading your customer to a space of profitability. That profitability conversation versus just more per acre. It seems like everybody's next tagline or their main selling point is more bushels per acre. And you can only stack so many things on each acre until that profitability of stacking things becomes not as viable. And then if you have a bad year, obviously even less so. So here, I mean, it almost seems, Nate,
Well,
like, yeah,
I was going to say
it,
we could really deep dive into that because listen, I mean, I get it. We produce a lot of grain here in the U.S. and that allows us to feed places like Narok and West Picot we talked about. But
yep.
as a farmer, as a farm kid, I should say, I'm really more about value over volume. Really,
Hmm. Hmm.
don't tell me how much you grew. Tell me what you sold it for.
Hmm.
That's more important. Our
Yep.
farms are businesses too, and our farmers need to be thinking that way.
Absolutely. All right, fantastic thoughts, man. We're way over time, and I appreciate you going deep into all this. So, Nate, thank you very much. What is the website again? Is it sorghumunited.com?
Yeah, sorghumunited.com is our group website. And then if you are interested in the children's books, those are sorghosquad.com. And there's a link on the Sorghum United site for that too. And don't forget our WhatsApp groups. Find that
Mhm.
global forums tab at the top of the Sorghum United website.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Really, really cool stuff, and I'm excited. This just hits at such a timely moment for me personally, and now being able to have this platform to share a little bit about something that I think could be a bigger part of our future in U.S. agriculture. So great stuff, man. Thank you.
Thanks for everything you're doing. I really have enjoyed watching it grow. Thank you.